The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Queen Camilla entered the grand dining hall. Her footsteps echoed in the vast space, but today the sound seemed different, heavier somehow. She had been queen for 3 years now, ever since Charles had taken the throne, but lately, she felt more like a stranger in her own home than its rightful mistress. Charles sat at the head of the mahogany table, his morning tea growing cold as he reviewed a stack of official documents. His face was stern, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been just months ago. The weight of the crown had aged him, but it was more than that. The palace had become a battlefield, and today would mark the beginning of the war's most brutal chapter. "Good morning, darling," Camilla said softly, taking her seat beside him. She reached for his hand, but he pulled it away, pretending to need both hands to turn the pages of his briefing notes. "We need to talk," Charles said without looking up. His voice carried the tone he usually reserved for state matters, formal and distant. "The council has made their concerns clear." Camilla felt her stomach drop. She had known this conversation was coming. The whispers in the corridors, the sideways glances from the staff, the increasingly cold shoulders from Charles's advisors. It had all been building to this moment. "What concerns?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Charles finally looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, a hardness that made her feel like she was looking at a stranger. "Your family, Camilla. They've become a liability." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her brother Marcus, who had struggled with addiction for years, but was finally getting his life together. Her sister Diana, a successful artist whose only crime was speaking her mind to the press when they attacked Camilla unfairly. Her elderly mother, who had done nothing but love and support her daughter through the most difficult transition of her life. A liability? Camilla's voice was barely a whisper. "Charles, these are the people who stood by me when the entire country wanted me gone. They're my family. And I'm your husband and your king," Charles replied, his voice growing colder. "The palace cannot continue to be associated with the scandals that seem to follow your relatives wherever they go." Camilla thought of the recent headlines. Marcus's old arrest record had been dragged up again when a tabloid needed a story. Diana had been photographed at a charity event where she had spoken passionately about mental health, but the press had twisted her words to make it seem like she was criticizing the royal family's handling of such issues. Her mother had been caught on camera crying at a grocery store when a stranger had confronted her about her daughter's past. "Those weren't scandals, Charles. Those were human moments. My brother is trying to rebuild his life. My sister was advocating for people who can't speak for themselves. My mother was defending me against someone who was being cruel." Charles set down his papers and leaned back in his chair. "The perception is what matters, Camilla. The monarchy cannot afford to be associated with controversy right now. We're still rebuilding trust with the people. So you want me to abandon the people who love me most?" Camilla's voice was rising now, emotion breaking through her usual composure. "I want you to make a choice," Charles said firmly. "Your family or your crown." The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla stared at her husband, searching his face for any sign of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. The man who had promised her that they would face everything together, that their love could overcome any obstacle. "You can't be serious," she said finally. "The council has made their position clear. Your family members will no longer be welcome at palace events. They will not receive invitations to state functions, and they will not be permitted to use their association with you for any public appearances or statements." Camilla felt the room spinning around her. The very people who had sacrificed so much for her happiness, who had endured years of public scrutiny and criticism simply for being related to her, were now being cast out like unwanted baggage. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Charles was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear it. "Then, perhaps you should consider whether this life is really what you want." The threat was clear, even unspoken. "Choose your family, and lose everything you've worked for. Lose your title, your position, your husband. Start over with nothing at an age when most people were thinking about retirement." Camilla rose from her chair slowly, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. "I need time to think. The announcement will be made at the end of the week," Charles said, returning his attention to his papers. "The decision has already been made, Camilla. I'm simply giving you the courtesy of advance notice." As she walked out of the dining hall, Camilla felt as if she were moving through a dream. The portraits of previous queens looked down at her from the walls, their painted eyes seeming to judge her. Had they faced such impossible choices? Had they been forced to choose between love and duty, between family and crown? She made her way to her private sitting room and closed the door behind her. For the first time since becoming queen, she allowed herself to cry. The tears came slowly at first, then, in great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Diana. "Can't wait to see you at Sunday lunch. Mom is making your favorite roast." The simple message broke her heart all over again. How could she tell them? How could she explain that the family gatherings that had been their lifeline through the worst of times were now forbidden? That the people she loved most in the world had become collateral damage in a game she had never wanted to play? Outside her window, she could see tourists gathered at the palace gates, taking photos and hoping for a glimpse of royalty. They saw the glamour, the jewels, the ceremonies. They didn't see the price that was paid behind closed doors, the pieces of yourself you had to give up one by one, until sometimes you wondered if there was anything left of who you used to be. Camilla wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. She was not just a wife or a sister or a daughter anymore. She was a queen, and queens did not have the luxury of putting their own happiness first. But, as she sat in the silence of her gilded prison, she wondered if the crown was worth the cost of everything she held dear. 3 days had passed since Charles delivered his ultimatum, and Camilla had barely slept. She found herself wandering the palace halls at night, her silk slippers silent against the cold marble floors. The portraits of her predecessors seemed to mock her in the dim light, their faces frozen in expressions of regal composure she could no longer maintain. Thursday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Lady Margaret Thornfield, Charles's chief advisor and the woman who had orchestrated much of the campaign against Camilla's family, arrived at the Queen's private office without an appointment. Margaret had always been beautiful in a sharp, calculating way, with steel-gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. "Your Majesty," Margaret said, offering a curtsy that somehow managed to seem more condescending than respectful. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I felt we needed to speak privately." Camilla gestured to the chairs by the fireplace, though she remained standing herself. She had learned early in her royal education that sometimes you needed to claim whatever small advantages you could find, and height was one of them. "What can I do for you, Lady Margaret?" "I wanted to discuss the transition that's coming," Margaret said smoothly, settling into her chair with practiced grace. "I know this must be difficult for you, but I think you'll find it's for the best in the long run." "Will I?" Camilla's voice was ice cold. Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Your family has been a source of concern for some time. Your brother's history with substances, your sister's tendency to speak out of turn, your mother's emotional displays in public. These things reflect poorly on the crown." "My brother has been sober for 18 months, Camilla said firmly. "My sister advocates for important causes. My mother loves her daughter. These are not crimes." "Of course not," Margaret agreed, her tone patronizing. "But perception is everything in this business. The public expects certain standards from the royal family, and, by extension, from those closest to them." Camilla moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where she had once walked with Charles during happier times. "And what about loyalty, Lady Margaret? What about standing by the people who stood by you?" "Loyalty is a luxury the monarchy cannot always afford," Margaret replied. "Your Majesty, may I speak frankly?" Camilla turned back to face her. "Haven't you been doing so already?" Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "The king's position is precarious right now. The Commonwealth nations are questioning the relevance of the monarchy in modern times. Public approval ratings are at historic lows. Every misstep, every scandal, every unflattering headline chips away at the foundation of everything we've built here. So my family becomes the sacrifice. Your family becomes the necessary adjustment," Margaret corrected. "Think of it as pruning a tree to help it grow stronger." The comparison made Camilla's stomach turn. These weren't branches to be cut away. They were human beings who had loved her unconditionally through the worst periods of her life. "There's something else," Margaret continued, her voice taking on a warning tone. "Your sister Diana has been in contact with several journalists. We believe she's considering writing a book." Camilla felt her blood run cold. "A book about what?" "About her experience as the sister of a queen. About the pressure your family has faced, the way you've all been treated by the palace and the press. She's been taking meetings." "You've been watching my sister?" Margaret's silence was answer enough. Camilla sank into the chair across from her, feeling suddenly exhausted. "So this isn't really about protecting the monarchy at all, is it? This is about controlling the narrative." "Every successful monarchy has understood the importance of managing information," Margaret said. Your sister's perspective on your journey to the throne might not align with the story we need the public to believe. The story we need them to believe, or the truth? Margaret stood, smoothing down her skirt. Sometimes those are the same thing, Your Majesty. And sometimes they're not. The art is in knowing which serves the greater good. After Margaret left, Camilla sat alone in her office for a long time. The weight of what she had just learned pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. Not only was her family being banished, but they were being silenced. Diana's book would never see the light of day, not if the palace had anything to say about it. She picked up her private phone, the one she used for personal calls, and dialed Diana's number. Her sister answered on the second ring. Cam, perfect timing. I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up? Diana, Camilla began, then stopped. How could she warn her sister without revealing that the palace was monitoring her activities? How could she protect Diana without putting her in even more danger? Is everything okay? You sound strange. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you writing a book? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Diana spoke again, her voice was careful. Who wants to know? I want to know. As your sister. Yes, Diana said finally. I've been thinking about it. Not to hurt you or cause problems, but, Cam, the things I've seen, the way our family has been treated, people should know the real cost of all this glamour. Camilla closed her eyes. Diana, you need to stop. You need to end those meetings and forget about the book. Why? What's happened? They know. They're watching you. And if you continue with this project, they'll find a way to stop you. And it won't be gentle. Diana was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was tight with anger. They're threatening you, aren't they? That's what this is about. Diana, please. Just drop it. For me. No, Diana said firmly. I won't be silenced by bullies, even if they wear crowns. They're not just bullies, Diana. They're powerful bullies with resources you can't imagine. Please, I'm begging you. And I'm begging you to remember who you are, Diana shot back. You're my sister first, Queen second. Or at least, you used to be. The line went dead, and Camilla stared at the phone in her hand. She had just lost another piece of her family, and this time it was her own doing. That evening, Charles found her in the library, surrounded by photo albums from before their marriage. Pictures of family holidays, birthday celebrations, quiet Sunday dinners where everyone talked over each other and laughed until their sides hurt. Margaret said you had a productive conversation today, Charles said, settling into the chair beside her. Camilla didn't look up from the photos. Did she? She seems to think you're beginning to understand the position we're in. The position you're in, Camilla corrected. I understand it perfectly. You're scared, Charles. You're so afraid of losing power that you'll sacrifice anything to keep it, including the people who love you most. Charles was quiet for a moment, and when Camilla finally looked at him, she saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Being king means making difficult choices, he said softly. And being your wife means accepting those choices, no matter who gets hurt. It means understanding that some things are bigger than personal happiness. Camilla closed the photo album and stood. You know what I think, Charles? I think you've forgotten the difference between being respected and being feared. A king who rules through fear might keep his throne, but he'll rule over a kingdom of people who are counting the days until he's gone. She left him sitting alone in the library, surrounded by the ghosts of happier times, and went to pack a suitcase. Tomorrow she would make a choice that would change everything. But tonight she needed to say goodbye to the woman she used to be. Friday arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself was mourning what was about to unfold. Camilla had spent the night pacing her private chambers, her suitcase packed, and hidden in her closet like a secret rebellion. She had made her decision, but she needed to see her family one more time before the palace announcement made it impossible. At 10 in the morning, she slipped out through the servants' entrance, something she had never done before as queen. Her security detail was minimal, just Detective Inspector James Crawford, who had been with her for 2 years and had become more friend than bodyguard. He asked no questions when she directed him to drive to her mother's cottage in the Cotswolds instead of to the scheduled charity event on her calendar. The cottage looked exactly as it always had. Roses climbing the stone walls, a vegetable garden tended with loving care, windows that gleamed in the pale sunlight. It was the kind of home that appeared in picture books about the English countryside, the kind of place where problems seemed smaller and love felt bigger. Diana's car was already in the driveway. Inside, Camilla could hear the sound of familiar voices and laughter. For a moment, She hesitated at the door, knowing that once she stepped inside, she would have to break their hearts. Her mother, Eleanor, opened the door with a radiant smile that faltered when she saw Camilla's expression. At 78, Eleanor was still beautiful, with silver hair that caught the light, and eyes the same deep blue as her daughter's. She had been the rock of their family through every storm, the one who held them all together when everything else fell apart. "Darling, what's wrong?" Eleanor asked immediately, pulling Camilla into the house. Diana was in the kitchen, arranging flowers in a vase. Marcus sat at the scrubbed wooden table, reading a newspaper and looking healthier than he had in years. The scene was so perfectly normal, so beautifully ordinary, that Camilla felt tears pricking her eyes before she even spoke. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice barely steady. Diana looked up from her flowers, and Marcus set down his paper. Eleanor guided them all to the sitting room, where they had shared so many important conversations over the years. The room was warm and cluttered with memories, photos on every surface, books stacked on tables, a half-finished knitting project draped over the arm of Eleanor's favorite chair. "The palace has made a decision," Camilla began, then stopped. How could she find words for something so cruel? "About us," Diana said quietly. It wasn't a question. Camilla nodded, unable to speak. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. At 45, he bore the scars of his struggles, but his eyes were clear now, focused. "They want us gone, don't they? Charles says you've become a liability," Camilla managed to say. "There will be an announcement this afternoon. You'll no longer be welcome at palace events or functions. You won't be able to use your connection to me for any public appearances." The silence that followed was devastating. Eleanor reached for Diana's hand, and Diana reached for Marcus's, and they sat there connected in their shared disbelief and hurt. "I see," Eleanor said finally, her voice steady but small. "And what do you say, darling?" The question broke something inside Camilla. Her mother wasn't asking what the palace had decided. She was asking what Camilla, as their daughter and sister, believed was right. "I say it's the cruelest thing I've ever been asked to accept," Camilla said, tears streaming down her face. "I say that the three of you are the best people I know, and if the crown requires me to pretend otherwise, then maybe the crown isn't worth having." Marcus stood up abruptly and walked to the window. His shoulders were shaking, and when he turned back to face them, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I did this," he said. "My past, my mistakes, they're using it against you." "No," Camilla said firmly. "Marcus, no. You've worked so hard to get your life back on track. You've been sober for 18 months. You volunteer at the rehabilitation center. You're helping other people find their way back to themselves. If they can't see the man you've become, that's their failure, not yours." "But I gave them the ammunition," Marcus replied bitterly. "Every time they need to justify why we're not worthy of being associated with royalty, they'll point to my arrests, my time in rehab, the headlines from my worst days." Diana stood and went to their brother, wrapping her arms around him. "You gave them nothing they didn't already have. They've been looking for an excuse to get rid of us since the day Camilla married Charles." "Diana," Eleanor warned gently. "It's true, Mom," Diana said, her voice growing stronger. "They never wanted Camilla to be queen in the first place. We're just convenient scapegoats for their own insecurities." Camilla watched her family rally around each other, and she felt a fierce pride mixed with her grief. This was what Charles and his advisors couldn't understand. This was what they saw as weakness. The way her family loved each other without condition, supported each other through failures as well as successes, and refused to abandon each other when times got hard. "There's something else," Camilla said quietly. "Diana, they know about the book." Diana's face went pale. "How?" "They've been watching you, monitoring your meetings with publishers and journalists." "The bloody nerve," Eleanor said, surprising them all. She rarely swore, and never in front of her children. "They can't stop me from writing it," Diana said, her jaw set with familiar determination. "They can make your life very difficult if you try," Camilla warned. "These people have resources and influence you can't imagine. They can destroy reputations and careers, make people disappear from public life completely." "Then, let them try," Diana said defiantly. "I'm not afraid of a bunch of overprivileged bullies." "I am," Eleanor said softly. "Not for myself, but for all of you." "Camilla, darling, what will this mean for you?" It was the question Camilla had been dreading. She looked around the room at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, and she knew she couldn't lie to them. "Charles has made it clear that I need to choose," she said. "My family or my crown. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. Then, you must choose the crown, she said firmly. Mum, no, Diana protested. Yes, Eleanor insisted. Camilla, you've worked too hard and sacrificed too much to give it all up now. We won't be the reason you lose everything you've earned. You're not the reason, Camilla said desperately. You're the victims. And sometimes victims have to make sacrifices too, Eleanor replied. If stepping back from your public life means you can keep your position and continue the good work you're doing, then that's what we'll do. Marcus returned to his seat, his face composed but his hands still trembling slightly. Mum's right. We can't ask you to give up being queen for us. You're not asking, Camilla said. I'm offering. Well, we're not accepting, Diana said firmly. Camilla, listen to me. You have a platform now that can help millions of people. You've used your position to champion causes that matter, mental health, domestic violence prevention, literacy programs. You can't throw that away because Charles and his cronies are too small-minded to see past their own prejudices. Camilla looked at her family, these people who were willing to sacrifice their own happiness for hers, and she felt a love so fierce it was almost painful. They were right, of course. She had spent years building a life as queen, creating programs and partnerships that made real differences in people's lives. But how could she continue that work knowing it came at the cost of the people she loved most? I can't just abandon you, she whispered. You're not abandoning us, Eleanor said, moving to sit beside her daughter and taking her hands. You're honoring us by continuing to be the woman we raised you to be. The woman who fights for what's right, even when it's difficult. But Sunday dinners, Camilla said, and her voice broke. Family holidays. The christening when Marcus has children. I'll miss everything. No, you won't, Diana said with surprising gentleness. We'll just have to be more creative about how we see each other. Private meetings, quiet visits when the press isn't watching. We're not losing you, Cam. We're just changing the rules of how we love each other. As afternoon faded into evening, they held each other and cried and planned how to navigate this new reality. They would survive this, as they had survived everything else. But the family that had gathered in that cottage would never be the same again, and they all knew it. The announcement came at precisely 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, delivered by the palace press secretary with the same measured tone usually reserved for updates about royal schedules or minor policy changes. The words were carefully chosen, clinical in their precision. The royal family has determined that certain associations may no longer align with the standards expected of the monarchy. Effective immediately, family members of Her Majesty will maintain a private relationship that does not extend to official royal functions or public representation. Camilla watched the news coverage from her private sitting room. Surrounded by packed boxes she hadn't yet found the courage to unpack. The reporters dissected every word, speculated about the reasons, and dredged up old stories about her family that she had hoped were buried forever. Marcus's arrest photos from 15 years ago flashed across the screen. Diana's passionate speech about mental health funding was replayed with ominous undertones. Even Eleanor was not spared, as cameras showed footage of her leaving the grocery store in tears after a confrontation with a stranger. Charles found her there an hour later, still staring at the television with glassy eyes. The remote control lay forgotten in her lap, and she hadn't moved to turn off the coverage that was slowly destroying what remained of her family's privacy. It's done, he said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. Yes, Camilla replied without looking at him. It's done. The press will move on to other stories within a few days. The public attention will fade. Will it? Camilla finally turned to face him, and Charles was startled by the emptiness in her eyes. Or will they just wait for the next opportunity to drag my family through the mud? Will they spend the rest of their lives being defined by this moment? Charles reached for the remote and turned off the television. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. I know this is difficult, he began. Do you? Camilla interrupted. Do you know what it's like to watch your elderly mother cry on national television? Do you know what it's like to see your brother, who has worked so hard to rebuild his life, reduced to nothing but his worst mistakes? Do you know what it's like to watch your sister being painted as a troublemaker for having the audacity to speak up for people who need help? Charles was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer. I know what it's like to sacrifice personal happiness for duty. I've been doing it my entire life. Have you? Camilla stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where tourists still gathered, hoping for a glimpse of royal life. Or have you just convinced yourself that's what you're doing to make it easier to live with the choices you've made? That's not fair, Camilla. She turned back to face him, and, for the first time in days, there was fire in her eyes instead of sadness. Fair? Charles, what about any of this has been fair? What was fair about making me choose between my family and my crown? What was fair about threatening people who have never done anything but love and support me? What was fair about turning my private pain into a public spectacle? Charles stood as well, his own composure beginning to crack. I am trying to preserve something that's bigger than both of us. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years because kings and queens have been willing to make difficult decisions. And how many of those kings and queens died alone, surrounded by courtiers instead of family? How many of them sacrificed so much for duty that they forgot what it meant to be human? We are not ordinary people, Camilla. We cannot afford to put personal relationships above the institution. The institution, Camilla repeated, and there was bitter laughter in her voice. Charles, what good is an institution that requires you to destroy everything you love to protect it? What are we preserving, really? A system that demands we sacrifice our humanity on the altar of tradition. Charles moved toward her, but she stepped back, maintaining the distance between them. I have given you everything, she continued, her voice rising. I gave up my privacy, my freedom, my old life. I endured years of hatred from people who thought I wasn't worthy of you. I smiled and waved and performed the role of queen even when it felt like it was killing me. But my family, they were the line I thought we would never cross. Your family will be fine, Charles said, but his voice lacked conviction. They can continue their lives without the burden of public scrutiny. You don't understand, do you? It's not about the public scrutiny. It's about loyalty. It's about standing by the people who stood by you when everyone else wanted you gone. My family didn't ask to be dragged into this life, Charles. They didn't volunteer to be collateral damage in your political calculations. Charles ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that reminded Camilla of the younger man she had fallen in love with before the weight of the crown had changed him. What do you want me to do? He asked, and, for the first time since this nightmare began, he sounded lost rather than imperious. The council is unanimous. The Commonwealth representatives have expressed concerns. The public polling shows that association with your family's complications is damaging our approval ratings. I want you to remember who you are, Camilla said softly. I want you to remember the man who once told me that love was worth fighting for, worth standing up to tradition and expectation. I want you to remember that the people we love are not disposable pawns in a political game. Charles sank back into his chair, suddenly, looking older than his years. It's not that simple anymore, Camilla. The stakes are too high. The stakes have always been high, she replied. The difference is that you used to believe some things were worth the risk. They stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of everything unsaid settling between them like a wall. Finally, Charles spoke again. What are you going to do? Camilla looked at him for a long moment, memorizing his face, storing away the memory of this conversation that would change everything between them. I'm going to be queen, she said quietly. I'm going to fulfill every obligation, attend every function, smile for every photo. I'm going to be the perfect royal wife and the ideal monarch's consort. Relief flickered across Charles's features, but it faded when she continued. But I'm also going to find ways to see my family that don't compromise your precious institution. I'm going to love them and support them, even if I have to do it in secret. And I'm going to remember every day what you were willing to sacrifice to keep your crown, because it will remind me who I can trust and who I can't. The words hit Charles like physical blows, and Camilla saw the exact moment he realized what he had lost in exchange for what he had preserved. Camilla, please, the decision has been made, Charles, she said, echoing his words from earlier in the week. I'm simply giving you the courtesy of advance notice. She walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. There's one more thing, she said without turning around. Lady Margaret's suggestion that my family's discretion needed to be ensured. I want you to know that if anything happens to any of them, if they have mysterious accidents or sudden health problems or their reputations are destroyed by convenient scandals, I will burn this entire institution to the ground. Crown or no crown, husband or no husband. Do we understand each other? Charles stared at her in shock. This was a side of Camilla he had never seen before, a steel core wrapped in silk gloves. Camilla, we would never, wouldn't you? She finally turned to look at him. A week ago, I would have said you would never force me to choose between my family and my crown. Now I know better. She left him sitting alone in the room, surrounded by the detritus of their shattered marriage, and went to begin the most difficult performance of her life. Pretending that her heart wasn't broken while fulfilling the duties of a queen. 6 months had passed since the announcement that tore Camilla's world apart, and the palace had settled into a new rhythm of careful choreography and calculated distances. To the outside world, Queen Camilla appeared to have adapted beautifully to her refined circumstances. She attended state dinners with grace, opened hospitals with appropriate gravitas, and delivered speeches with the polished confidence of someone born to the role. But those who looked closely might have noticed the subtle changes. The warmth in her eyes had been replaced by something cooler, more guarded. Her smiles, while technically perfect, never quite reached those eyes anymore. She moved through her duties with the precision of a ballet dancer, each gesture rehearsed and controlled, but there was no joy in the performance. The marriage between Camilla and Charles had become similarly choreographed. They appeared together at official functions, stood side by side for photographs, and maintained the illusion of partnership that the monarchy required. But, in private, they had become polite strangers sharing the same palatial address. Conversations were limited to logistics and schedule coordination. They slept in separate bedrooms and took their meals at different times. Charles had tried, in those first weeks after their confrontation, to bridge the gap that had opened between them. He sent flowers to her rooms, left handwritten notes apologizing for the pain he had caused, even attempted to recreate the intimate dinners they used to share. But Camilla had built walls around herself that his gestures couldn't penetrate. She was cordial, professional, and utterly unreachable. The real tragedy, however, was playing out away from the palace's marble corridors. Eleanor had fallen into a depression that worried the entire family. At 78, she had been the pillar of strength for so long that seeing her fade felt like watching the sun grow dim. She spent most days in her cottage, tending to her garden with mechanical precision, but none of her former joy. Visitors noticed that she had aged years in a matter of months, her silver hair now white, her steps slower, her legendary optimism replaced by a quiet melancholy. Diana had thrown herself into her advocacy work with an almost manic intensity, as if staying busy enough could outrun the hurt. She traveled constantly, spoke at conferences, and poured her energy into causes that mattered to her. But her friends noticed that she never spoke about her sister anymore, and the light in her eyes when discussing family had dimmed considerably. The book she had been writing remained unfinished, not because of palace pressure, but because she could no longer find words for the pain. Marcus had perhaps been hit the hardest of all. The public nature of his rejection had triggered a spiral of shame and self-doubt that threatened his sobriety. He had stopped attending family gatherings, unable to bear the weight of believing he was responsible for his sister's suffering. His sponsor at the rehabilitation center where he volunteered had to work overtime to keep him from falling back into old patterns of self-destruction. Camilla knew all of this because she had found ways to maintain contact that the palace couldn't monitor or control. Anonymous donations appeared in Eleanor's garden fund account each month. Marcus received encouraging letters with no return address that somehow always arrived when he needed them most. Diana found mysterious flowers delivered to her office after difficult days, always with cards signed only from someone who believes in you. But secret support could only do so much when what her family really needed was her presence, her voice, her ability to gather them all together and remind them that love was stronger than any institution. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked Tuesday in November. Camilla was reviewing briefing notes for an upcoming visit to a children's hospital when Detective Inspector Crawford knocked on her office door. His face was grave, and she knew immediately that something terrible had happened. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "I've received word that your mother has been taken to hospital. She collapsed at home this morning." The briefing notes scattered to the floor as Camilla stood, her hands shaking. "How serious?" "I don't have details yet, ma'am. But your sister is asking if you can come." For a moment, Camilla felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, with duty pulling her in one direction and love pulling her in the other. The palace had made it clear that unsanctioned visits to family members would be viewed as violations of the agreement that had kept her crown intact. But her mother was lying in a hospital bed, and all the protocols in the world couldn't make that acceptable. "Get the car," she said. "Ma'am, perhaps we should clear this with, get the car, James." Now, the drive to the hospital felt eternal, even though Crawford pushed the speed limits as much as he dared. Camilla stared out the rain-streaked windows and made bargains with whatever power might be listening. Let her mother be okay, and she would accept any consequence. Let Eleanor live to see another spring in her garden, and Camilla would find a way to bear whatever punishment the palace deemed appropriate. Diana was waiting in the hospital corridor when Camilla arrived, her face streaked with tears, and her usually perfect composure completely shattered. They fell into each other's arms without speaking, holding on as if they could anchor each other against the storm that was threatening to drown them both. "How is she?" Camilla asked when they finally pulled apart. "Stable, for now," Diana replied, wiping her eyes. "The doctors think it was exhaustion and dehydration, but they're running more tests. Cam, she's been barely eating for weeks. She's just been fading away." Marcus appeared at the end of the corridor, moving slowly as if he were walking underwater. When he saw his sisters together, something that had been holding him upright seemed to crumble, and he sank into a chair with his head in his hands. "This is my fault," he said, his voice muffled. "All of it. If I had made different choices, better choices, Mom would still be strong, and you would still be happy, and none of this nightmare would be happening." Diana sat beside him, taking one of his hands in both of hers. "Marcus, listen to me. You made mistakes, yes. But you've also done the hard work of making amends. You've been sober for 2 years now. You've helped dozens of people find their way back from addiction. The only people who are responsible for this situation are the ones who decided that punishing you was more important than showing compassion." Camilla knelt in front of her brother, forcing him to look at her. "Diana's right. The palace chose to see you as a liability instead of recognizing the incredible person you've become. That's their failure, not yours." For the first time in months, the 3 siblings were together, united in their worry for their mother and their determination to support each other. It felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile territory. A doctor approached them, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands. "Are you Mrs. Peterson's family?" "Yes," Camilla said, standing. "I'm her daughter." If the doctor recognized her as the queen, she gave no sign of it. "She's asking for you. She's weak, but stable. Try not to tire her too much." Eleanor looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes that seemed to dwarf her. But when she saw her 3 children file into the room, her face lit up with a joy that made her look years younger. "My darlings," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're all here." They gathered around her bed, each taking one of her hands or touching her shoulder, reconnecting the family circle that had been broken for too long. For several minutes, they simply held each other and cried, releasing months of suppressed grief and fear and love. "I've been so foolish," Eleanor said finally, her voice barely audible. "Wasting away because I couldn't see my daughter whenever I wanted. As if love could be diminished by distance or protocol." "Mom, you haven't been foolish," Camilla said, stroking her mother's hair. "You've been heartbroken. We all have." Eleanor struggled to sit up straighter, and Diana helped her adjust the pillows behind her back. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, more like the woman who had raised 3 children with unwavering strength and wisdom. "No more," she said firmly. "No more hiding. No more letting other people's fears and prejudices dictate how we love each other. Camilla, darling, you are my daughter first and a queen second. If the crown requires you to pretend otherwise, then perhaps it's time to reconsider the value of that crown." Camilla felt something shift inside her chest, like a door that had been locked for months suddenly, swinging open. Her mother was right. She had spent so much energy trying to preserve her position that she had forgotten what made that position worth having in the first place. Outside the hospital window, the rain was beginning to clear, and shafts of late afternoon sunlight were breaking through the clouds. For the first time in months, Camilla could see a path forward that didn't require her to choose between love and duty, but rather found a way to honor both. The choice she was about to make would shake the foundations of the monarchy and redefine what it meant to be queen in the modern age. But as she looked at her family gathered around her mother's hospital bed, united in their love and determination, she knew it was the only choice she could live with. The girl who had once dreamed of fairy tale endings had learned that the most important battles aren't fought in ballrooms or throne rooms, but in hospital corridors and quiet moments where love proves stronger than fear. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change the world.